Captain Thorne stood at the bridge of the Resolute, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the ship's viewport. The silence of space was deceptive, masking the growing tensions in the galaxy. Human cargo ships had been disappearing along the Gorathian border for months, and every investigation led to more questions. The galactic conglomerate, made up of various species, had offered little more than diplomatic platitudes, but for Thorne and his crew, the threat felt far more real. "Captain," Lieutenant Mira said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship's systems. She stood beside him, her posture stiff but her mind sharp. "We've just received a distress signal from Colony Epsilon. A fleet of unidentified ships has breached the perimeter." Thorne turned to her, his brow furrowed. Unidentified or Gorathian? Mira glanced at her datapad, her expression grim. "All signs point to Gorathian raiders. They've been hitting our supply lines for weeks now, and it looks like they're getting bolder." The captain nodded, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He'd served long enough to know that this wasn't just a series of isolated attacks. The Gorathians were testing humanity's limits, seeing how far they could push before the humans would push back. "Set course for Epsilon," Thorne ordered. "We need to get there before it's too late." As the crew jumped into action, Thorne's thoughts drifted to the mission ahead. The Gorathians were an old and warlike species, known for their brute force and disdain for diplomacy. It didn't help that the Galactic Council seemed unwilling to act, leaving humanity to fend for itself. But Thorne had faced worse odds before. Humanity had a knack for survival, and they weren't about to let anyone take that from them. Dr. Vallis, the alien diplomat assigned to their ship, approached the captain with cautious steps. "Captain Thorne, I know the situation looks dire, but we must consider all options before resorting to violence." Thorne glanced at Vallis, appreciating his calm demeanor despite the looming threat. Vallis had long advocated for peaceful cooperation between humans and other species, but Thorne wasn't sure that diplomacy would work with the Gorathians. "You've seen the reports, Vallis. They're not interested in talking." Vallis sighed, looking out at the stars. "Perhaps, but rushing into battle could lead to unnecessary destruction. We must at least try to reach them before it's too late." Thorne admired Vallis' optimism, but knew they were running out of time. The Gorathians wouldn't wait for negotiations. They were predators, and right now, they saw humanity as prey. "Get your diplomatic channels ready," Thorne said, turning to face Vallis. "But don't be surprised if this ends in a fight." The Resolute surged forward, faster than light, cutting through the void toward Colony Epsilon. The crew worked in unison, preparing for the unknown. Thorne stood at the center of it all, the weight of command resting heavily on his shoulders. He knew that the coming days would test not only his leadership, but the very strength of humanity itself. As they neared the colony, the sensors lit up with activity. A fleet of Gorathian warships was already in orbit, their presence unmistakable. The colony's defenses were overwhelmed, and distress signals were flooding in from the surface. "Shields up," Thorne barked. "Prepare for combat." The Resolute dropped out of FTL, and immediately the Gorathian ships turned their attention toward them. Thorne's eyes narrowed as he studied the enemy formation. They were big, brutal, and well-armed, but humans had never relied on brute force alone. They were survivors, engineers, and strategists. Mira's voice was calm but urgent. "Enemy ships locking weapons. They're not waiting for us to make the first move." "Then we won't disappoint them," Thorne said, a cold determination in his voice. "Let's remind them that humans don't go down without a fight." And with that, the battle for Colony Epsilon began. The Gorathian ships closed in fast, their weapons glowing with charged energy as they prepared to fire. The Resolute maneuvered sharply, keeping its shields up and weapons primed. Captain Thorne gripped the armrest of his command chair, eyes scanning the tactical display as red dots swarmed closer. "Incoming fire," Lieutenant Mira shouted, her hands dancing over the controls. "Brace for impact." The ship shuddered as the Gorathians unleashed their opening salvo, a barrage of plasma bolts hammering the Resolute's shields. Thorn clenched his jaw. Their shields held, but he knew it wouldn't last long if they didn't find a way to turn the tide. "Return fire," Thorn ordered. "Target their lead ships and aim for the engines. We need to slow them down." The Resolute's cannons roared to life, sending bright streaks of energy toward the Gorathian fleet. The lead enemy ship shuddered as several shots hit home, causing its engines to sputter. The Gorathians, caught off guard by the sudden counterattack, hesitated for a moment. It was all the opening Thorn needed. "Mira, what's the status of the colony's defenses?" Thorn asked, his gaze still locked on the tactical display. "They're barely holding on," Mira replied, frustration lacing her voice. "Their defense platforms were hit in the first wave. If we don't take some of the heat off them, the colony won't last another hour." Thorn's mind raced. The Gorathians had come prepared for an easy victory, and for a moment, it looked like they might get it. But humans had a way of turning impossible situations around. He needed to buy the colony more time, and for that, they needed to outthink the enemy. "Send a transmission to the colony," Thorn said. "Tell them to reroute whatever power they have left to their shield generators. We'll take care of the rest." Mira nodded and quickly sent the message. As the colony scrambled to follow the captain's orders, Thorn turned his attention back to the battlefield. "Valis," Thorn called, turning to the alien diplomat who was anxiously observing the unfolding chaos. "I need you to get a message through to the Gorathians. Try one last time to open negotiations. Maybe we can buy ourselves a little more time." Valis hesitated, but quickly activated the diplomatic channels. His voice, calm and measured, echoed through the ship as he reached out to the enemy. "This is Dr. Valis of the United Terran Alliance. We seek peaceful resolution to this conflict. Cease your attack, and we can negotiate terms." For a few moments, there was nothing but static. Thorn kept his eyes on the Gorathian fleet, hoping against hope that they would respond. But as the seconds ticked by, the Gorathians remained silent, their ships pressing forward with cold determination. "No response," Valis said quietly, his hands shaking slightly as he deactivated the channel. "I didn't think there would be," Thorn replied grimly. "But it was worth a shot. Mira, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're going to give them a little surprise." Mira's eyes lit up as she recognized the tone in her captain's voice. "You've got a plan, sir." Thorn grinned. "Let's just say the Gorathians aren't the only ones who know how to fight dirty." He leaned forward, studying the battlefield. The Gorathians were strong, but they were predictable. They relied on brute force, believing that sheer firepower would win the day. Thorn was betting they wouldn't expect a more tactical approach. "Mira, take us into that asteroid field at Sector 12, Thorn ordered. "We'll use the rocks for cover and lure them in." Mira's fingers flew across the console, and the Resolute banked hard, speeding toward the asteroid belt that lay just beyond the battle. The Gorathians, sensing their prey trying to flee, followed without hesitation. As the Resolute weaved between the massive floating rocks, Mira skillfully guided the ship through the narrow passages. The Gorathians, larger and less agile, struggled to keep up. Their ships collided with asteroids, creating explosions of debris that filled the space behind them. "Fire at will," Thorn commanded. "Pick them off while they're distracted." The Resolute's cannons unleashed a barrage of fire, striking the vulnerable Gorathian ships as they tried to navigate the asteroid field. One by one, the enemy vessels fell, crippled by their own overconfidence. The human crew cheered as the tide began to turn in their favor. But Thorn's smile faded as a new alert flashed on the tactical display. "Captain," Mira said, her voice tight with alarm. "I'm picking up a new signal. A larger Gorathian ship is approaching, much bigger than anything we've seen so far." Thorn stared at the display, his heart sinking. The new ship was massive, a Gorathian dreadnought, dwarfing the smaller vessels that had already engaged them. This was no simple raid. The Gorathians had sent a warship capable of devastating entire colonies. "All hands," Brace yourselves, Thorn said, his voice steady but tense. This fight is far from over. As the Gorathian dreadnought loomed closer, the crew of the Resolute prepared for the battle of their lives. The Gorathian dreadnought loomed large on the tactical display, its silhouette dominating the screen like a dark omen. The tension on the bridge of the Resolute was palpable. Every crew member was focused, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of their consoles, while Captain Thorn stood at the center, his gaze never leaving the enemy's ship. That thing's got enough firepower to turn us into space debris, Lieutenant Mira said, her voice low but steady. Our shields won't last long if it gets a direct hit. Thorn nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Then we won't let them get that hit. Valis, any luck reaching them? Dr. Valis shook his head, his usually calm demeanor giving way to frustration. The Gorathians aren't responding to any diplomatic channels. They've gone completely silent. They're not interested in talking, Thorn said. They're here to make an example of us. The Resolute was outgunned, and Thorn knew it. But if there was one thing humanity had learned from centuries of conflict, it was that battles weren't always won by the strongest. The key to survival was strategy and unpredictability. Options, people, Thorn called out, his eyes scanning the room. We're not going to outrun them, and we can't face them head-on. Mira's fingers flew across her console, her brow furrowed in concentration. We could use the asteroid field for cover, but they've got long-range sensors. They'd see us coming. Thorn thought for a moment. We need to even the odds. What if we use the asteroids as weapons? Mira looked at him, intrigued. You mean sling the asteroids at them? Exactly, Thorn said, his mind racing. If we can maneuver behind the larger asteroids, we can fire thrusters at precise points to send them hurtling toward the dreadnought. Their size and mass should do some damage, even with their shields up. Valis blinked in surprise. That's a bold strategy, Captain. It's risky, Thorn admitted, but right now it's the best shot we've got. Mira grinned. I like it. Let's turn the rocks into missiles. All right, Thorn said, turning to the crew. We're going to draw them into the asteroid field. Mira, plot a course that'll take us through the densest area. We'll need to keep our movements unpredictable. The Gorathians are used to brute force, not precision. Let's give them something they can't anticipate. The Resolute surged forward, moving deeper into the asteroid field as the Gorathian dreadnought followed. Thorn's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained calm. He had led his crew through worse situations before. This was just another fight, another chance for humanity to prove its mettle. As they navigated between the massive rocks, Mira carefully adjusted the ship's trajectory, positioning them behind a particularly large asteroid. Ready to fire thrusters, Mira said, her fingers poised over the controls. Do it, Thorn ordered. The Resolute's thrusters fired, sending the asteroid hurtling toward the Gorathian dreadnought. For a moment, there was silence, and then the asteroid slammed into the enemy ship's shields with a deafening crack. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through space, and the dreadnought shuddered under the force. Direct hit, Mira shouted, her excitement palpable. Their shields are holding, but they're taking damage. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Keep it up. Let's see how many hits they can take before those shields fail. The Resolute fired its thrusters again, sending more asteroids crashing into the dreadnought. The Gorathian ship struggled to maintain its position, its massive frame reeling from the impacts. Still, it pressed forward, firing its weapons wildly in an attempt to hit the smaller human ship. Incoming fire, Mira warned as the dreadnought's cannons unleashed a volley of plasma bolts. Brace, Thorn shouted. The ship rocked violently as the plasma bolts struck their shields. The lights flickered, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. Thorn gritted his teeth, holding onto his chair as the Resolute struggled to stay intact. Shields at 50%, Mira reported, her voice tense. We can't take too many more hits like that. We won't need to, Thorne said, his mind racing for the next move. Prepare the ion cannons. We're going to disable their engines. Mira's eyes widened. You want to board the dreadnought? Thorne gave a grim nod. If we can disable their engines, we'll have a window to get a boarding team aboard. We need to take the fight to them, up close. That's where we excel. Valis looked uneasy. Captain, that's an incredibly dangerous move. The Gorethians are not known for showing mercy to those they capture. I'm not planning on getting captured, Thorne said firmly. But we need to stop that dreadnought before it reaches the colony. This is our best chance. The Resolute fired its ion cannons, bright blue beams lancing out across the void. They struck the Gorathian dreadnought's engines, sending sparks flying as the massive ship sputtered and slowed. Engines are down, Mira said, barely believing it. They're dead in the water. Good, Thorne said, his voice cold. Prep the boarding team. We're going in. As the crew scrambled to prepare for the assault, Thorne took a deep breath. He knew the next phase of the battle would be even more dangerous, but he also knew that this was what humanity did best, fighting with everything they had, even when the odds were against them. All right, Thorne said, his eyes hard. Let's show the Gorethians what happens when they mess with humanity. And with that, the Resolute moved in for the final strike. The Resolute glided toward the crippled Gorethian dreadnought, its sleek frame cutting through the debris-littered space. The massive alien ship hung motionless, its engines sputtering with faint sparks of energy. Despite the dreadnought's sheer size and power, it was now vulnerable, a sitting target in the cold depths of space. Boarding team ready, Captain Mira said, standing beside Thorne with her usual calm resolve. Her hand rested on her sidearm, but her mind was already calculating the next steps. Thorne nodded, glancing at the small squad gathered at the ship's launch bay. Each member was suited up, their faces set with grim determination. They were about to enter one of the most dangerous ships in the galaxy, and every one of them knew the risks. Thorne himself would lead the mission. He wouldn't ask his people to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. Remember, this isn't about glory, Thorne addressed the team, his voice steady. We're here to disable their systems and force a surrender. Stick to the plan, cover your corners, and we'll all get out of this alive. Mira, staying behind to manage the ship, gave him a sharp nod. Good luck, Captain. I'll be monitoring your progress. If anything goes wrong. I know you'll pull us out, Thorne replied with a faint smile. But both of them understood the gravity of the situation. If they failed, there wouldn't be much left to pull out. The Resolute's boarding pods detached from the ship's hull, rocketing toward the dreadnought. Inside the cramped pod, the silence was broken only by the soft hum of the systems and the steady breathing of the team. Thorne's grip tightened on his pulse rifle, his heart pounding as they neared the dreadnought's docking bay. As the pod made contact with the Gorathian ship, the magnetic clamps locked into place with a sharp clang. The airlock hissed open, and the team filed out into the dark, metallic corridors of the enemy vessel. The air inside was thick and oppressive, the scent of burning circuits lingering in the cold atmosphere. Stay sharp, Thorne whispered, his voice crackling over the comms. We're in their territory now. The Gorathians were known for their harsh, utilitarian ships, and the dreadnought was no exception. The walls were lined with jagged metal, and the dim red emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the team's path. Thorne led the way, his rifle raised as they moved deeper into the ship. Their goal was clear: reach the dreadnought's central command center and disable its weapon systems. Without those, the Gorathians would have no choice but to surrender. But the journey through the massive ship was anything but simple. Every corner could hold a deadly ambush, and the Gorathians were not known for their mercy. Contacts up ahead. One of the soldiers, Lieutenant Kov, said, his voice tense. He had spotted movement on his scanner, a group of Gorathian warriors approaching fast. Take cover, Thorne ordered. The team scattered, finding cover behind bulkheads and support beams as the Gorathians rounded the corner. The aliens were as imposing as their reputation suggested, towering figures clad in heavy armor, their faces obscured by menacing helmets. They moved with brutal efficiency, their weapons raised as they closed in on the human team. Thorn didn't hesitate. Engage. The corridor erupted in a hail of gunfire as the humans opened fire. Pulse rounds tore through the air, slamming into the advancing Gorathians. The aliens returned fire, their weapons crackling with energy as bolts of plasma slammed into the walls around Thorn's team. The humans, outnumbered but quicker and more precise, used the narrow corridor to their advantage. Mira's tactical planning had paid off. They had chosen their route carefully, making it hard for the Gorathians to use their size and strength. One by one, the massive warriors fell, their armor cracked and their weapons silent. "Clear," Thorn called out, his pulse racing as the last of the Gorathians dropped to the floor. "Captain," Val's voice crackled through the comms. The alien diplomat, left back on the Resolute, had been monitoring the situation. "I'm detecting more Gorathian troops converging on your position. They know you're here." Thorn cursed under his breath. Time was running out. "We need to move," now Thorn said, motioning for the team to advance. "We're close to the command center." The team moved quickly through the winding corridors, the echoes of distant footsteps and clanking metal following them like a shadow. The dreadnought felt like a living, breathing entity, and the deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Every step forward felt like a step closer to the heart of a beast. Finally, they reached the command center. A massive, circular chamber, filled with glowing control panels and towering holographic displays. At the center of the room stood a lone Gorathian commander, taller and broader than the others, his crimson armor adorned with markings that signified his rank. His cold, predatory eyes locked onto Thorn and his team as they entered. "You have come far," the Gorathian commander growled, his voice deep and guttural. "But this is where your journey ends." Thorn raised his rifle, but the commander made no move to attack. Instead, he tilted his head, as if studying the human captain. "You fight well, for a species so young. But you are no match for the might of the Gorathian Empire. Your colony will burn, as will your homeworld." Thorn's expression hardened. "You had your chance to end this peacefully. Now we end it our way." Without another word, the team opened fire, but the commander was fast, faster than any of the others. He darted to the side, his armor deflecting the first few shots as he raised his own weapon. The room became a storm of gunfire and energy blasts, with the Gorathian commander using his superior strength and speed to outmaneuver the humans. Thorn's team was skilled, but the commander was relentless. His weapon discharged a blast of plasma that sent 2 soldiers crashing to the ground. Thorn gritted his teeth, pushing forward as his team tried to bring the alien down. "We need to disable the systems." Mira's voice crackled over the comms, a reminder of their mission. They couldn't win this fight through brute force alone. Thorn saw his chance. "Kolv, cover me." While Kolv and the remaining soldiers laid down suppressive fire, Thorn dashed toward the central console. His hands flew over the controls, bypassing the security protocols as the Gorathian commander rolled in fury, realizing what Thorn was doing. "Almost there," Thorn muttered, the system finally unlocking with a sharp beep. He activated the override, shutting down the dreadnought's weapons and engines. The lights in the command center flickered, and the massive ship shuddered as its power began to drain. The Gorathian commander lunged toward Thorn, but this time he was too slow. A well-placed shot from Kov slammed into the commander's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Thorn stood, breathing heavily as the dreadnought powered down around them. "It's over," he said quietly, though the victory felt hollow. The battle had cost them dearly, and it wasn't over yet. "We've disabled the ship." Mira's voice came through again, relief in her tone. "But there are still Gorathian forces out there. What's next, Captain?" Thorn looked down at the fallen Gorathian commander, his expression unreadable. "We regroup," he said, "and we prepare for whatever comes next." Back aboard the Resolute, Captain Thorne stood in the med bay, watching as the medics worked tirelessly to stabilize the wounded. The boarding mission had been a success, but the cost had been high. 2 soldiers had been killed in the firefight with the Garathian commander, and several others were injured. Thorne clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every life lost under his command, but there was no time to mourn. The Garathians wouldn't stop with one dreadnought. More would come. Lieutenant Mira entered the room, her usual confident stride subdued by the gravity of their situation. "Captain, we've completed the analysis of the Dreadnought's data logs," she said, handing him a data pad. "It's worse than we thought." Thorne raised an eyebrow. "How bad?" Mira's expression darkened. That Dreadnought wasn't just part of a random attack force. It was the vanguard of a full-scale invasion. The Garathians have been massing fleets on the other side of their territory, and they're preparing to launch a coordinated assault on several human colonies within the next few weeks. Thorne's gut tightened. This wasn't a border skirmish or a show of force. The Garathians were planning a war, and they had no intention of stopping until humanity was crushed. The Resolute had only delayed the inevitable. "We need to get this information back to Earth," Thorne said, his voice firm. "The fleet needs to mobilize. If we don't act now, we'll be caught off guard." Mira nodded. "I've already transmitted the data to command. They've ordered all ships in the sector to return to base for refitting and preparation." But she hesitated. "But what?" Thorne asked, narrowing his eyes. "There's a lot of hesitation back home," Mira admitted. "Some of the leadership is worried about escalating the conflict. They're talking about diplomacy, trying to negotiate with the Garathians before things get worse." Thorne scoffed. "Diplomacy? We've seen how well that works. The Garathians aren't interested in talking. They're predators, and they see us as prey. If we don't fight back, they'll tear through our colonies like a wildfire." Mira looked conflicted but nodded in agreement. "I think command will come around once they see the scale of the threat, but we need time to prepare." Thorne's mind raced. Time was the one thing they didn't have. The Garathians had already sent their first wave, and more would follow. If humanity didn't act quickly, their colonies would be overrun. "We won't just sit here waiting to be attacked," Thorne said, his voice low but determined. "We need to send a message." Mira raised an eyebrow. "What kind of message?" Thorne's eyes hardened. "We need to show the Garathians that humanity isn't weak. We'll hit them where it hurts, disrupt their plans before they can launch the full invasion." Mira's eyes widened. "You're suggesting a preemptive strike?" Thorne nodded. "Exactly. We know where their fleets are massing. If we can strike now, we can delay their invasion, buy ourselves the time we need to mobilize our forces." Mira considered this for a moment. "It's risky. If we fail, it could provoke the Garathians into launching the invasion earlier than planned." Thorne's expression remained resolute. "It's a risk we have to take. We've seen what happens when we sit back and wait. The Garathians are testing us, seeing if we have the strength to defend ourselves. If we don't respond, they'll think we're easy prey." Mira nodded slowly. "I trust your judgment, Captain. I'll start coordinating with the fleet. We'll need every available ship for this operation." As Mira left to prepare, Thorne turned his attention to the data pad in his hand. The logs from the Garathian dreadnought revealed more than just fleet movements. They also contained information about the Garathians' command structure, their tactics, and their weaknesses. Thorne's mind worked furiously, piecing together a strategy that could turn the tide of the war before it even began. Dr. Vallis entered the room, his usually composed face showing signs of worry. "Captain, I heard about your plan," he said, his voice tense. "A preemptive strike. It's dangerous. The Galactic Council might see it as an act of aggression. It could spark a larger conflict." Thorne met Vallis' gaze, his voice calm but firm. "We're already in a conflict, Vallis. The Garathians made that clear when they attacked our colonies. If we don't act now, they'll wipe us out." Vallis sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I understand your point, but there's still a chance. however slim, that diplomacy could work. The Gorethians aren't a monolith. Some factions within their empire might be open to negotiation. Thorn shook his head. I respect your belief in diplomacy, Valis, but this isn't about factions or politics. The Gorethians see us as weak, and they won't stop until they've broken us. The only way to survive is to show them that we're not to be underestimated. Valis frowned but said nothing, clearly torn between his belief in peaceful resolution and the harsh reality of the situation. We'll need your help too, Thorn added, softening his tone. If there's any chance of avoiding an all-out war, it'll be because we've shown the Gorathians that we're strong enough to make them reconsider. Valis nodded slowly. I'll do what I can, but be careful, Captain. One wrong move, and this could spiral out of control. Thorn watched as Valis left the room, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it, the moment that could define the future of humanity. He had to trust his instincts, trust that they were doing the right thing. The Resolute and the few remaining human ships in the area began to gather at the edge of Gorathian space. The plan was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and retreat before the Gorathians could mount a full defense. It was a gamble, but Thorn knew it was the best shot they had. As the fleet prepared for the assault, Thorn stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out at the vast emptiness of space, the calm before the storm. All ships are in position, Mira reported, her voice tense with anticipation. We're ready when you are, Captain. Thorn took a deep breath. All right, let's wake the giant. With that, the human fleet surged forward, engines blazing as they raced toward the heart of Gorathian territory. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was a message, a warning to the Gorathians and to the galaxy. Humanity had been underestimated for too long. Now, they would show the universe what happened when you poked the sleeping giant. The human fleet hurtled toward the Gorathian assembly point, engines burning bright against the backdrop of distant stars. The Resolute led the charge, Captain Thorn at the helm, his face set with grim determination. The other ships followed closely behind, a motley collection of frigates, cruisers, and battleships, all that remained of the human forces in this sector. It wasn't much, but it was enough. This is it, Thorn muttered to himself, eyes scanning the vastness of space. He knew they were outnumbered, but that didn't matter. This was humanity's stand, their moment to strike before the Gorathian war machine could fully awaken. Lieutenant Mira stood beside him, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the console as she calculated their approach. We'll reach the Gorathian fleet in 10 minutes, Captain, she reported, her voice tight with anticipation. They haven't detected us yet, but once we're in range, they'll know we're here. Thorn nodded. Let's make sure we give them something to remember. The plan was daring, even reckless. They would strike the Gorathian fleet while it was still gathering, catch them off guard, and inflict as much damage as possible. Then, before the enemy could retaliate, the humans would retreat, buying valuable time for their forces back home to prepare for the inevitable war. It was a gamble, but one that could shift the balance of power if they survived. Valis, Thorn said, turning to the alien diplomat who had remained on board despite his reservations. Any sign of a diplomatic window? Valis looked pale, clearly uncomfortable with the aggressive nature of the plan. I've tried every channel I could, Captain. The Gorathians aren't responding. I don't think they're interested in negotiations, at least not right now. Thorn frowned. Figures, they've already made their choice. He glanced at Mira. Prepare the fleet. Once we're within range, I want all ships to focus fire on the lead Gorathian warship. We'll take out their command vessel first. Without it, they'll be in chaos. Mira nodded and relayed the orders to the rest of the fleet. The tension on the bridge grew as the minutes ticked by, the silence only broken by the hum of the ship's systems and the quiet murmur of the crew. Everyone knew what was at stake. Captain, Mira said suddenly, her eyes widening as new data flashed across her screen. I'm detecting movement. Gorathian ships, a lot of them. Thorn leaned forward, his jaw tightening. How many? More than we expected, Mira replied, her voice growing more urgent. It looks like the bulk of their fleet has already arrived. We're outnumbered 10-1. For a moment, the bridge fell silent. Even Thorn felt a flicker of doubt. The odds were far worse than they had anticipated, but he pushed the doubt aside, knowing there was no turning back now. We've been in worse situations, Thorn said, his voice steady. We're not here to win the war today. We're here to send a message. Let's hit them where it hurts. The fleet powered up its weapons, each ship locking onto the lead Gorathian warship, a massive behemoth of a vessel bristling with weapons. Thorn knew it would take everything they had to bring it down, but if they could cripple it, the rest of the Gorathian fleet would hesitate. All ships fire at will, Thorn commanded. The void of space erupted in a blaze of light as the human fleet unleashed its full firepower. Pulse cannons, energy beams, and missile barrages streaked toward the Gorathian warship, slamming into its shields with relentless force. The Gorathians, caught by surprise, scrambled to respond, but the humans pressed the attack, concentrating their fire on the vulnerable spots Mira had identified. Direct hits, Mira reported, her voice filled with tension. Their shields are weakening. The Gorathian ship returned fire, its cannons lighting up the blackness of space as it targeted the Resolute. The human ship shuddered under the impact of the enemy's weapons, alarms blaring as the shields strained to hold. Shields at 60%, Mira warned. Keep firing, Thorn ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. We take that ship down, or we don't go home. The human fleet continued its barrage, their weapons tearing into the Gorathian warship's hull. Explosions rippled across its surface as the shields finally gave way. The alien vessel began to list, its engines sputtering as fires raged across its decks. They're losing power, Mira exclaimed. We've got them. But just as the Gorathian warship began to falter, a new wave of enemy ships emerged from the darkness, closing in on the human fleet with terrifying speed. Thorn's heart sank as he realized they were being surrounded. Captain, we've got incoming on all sides, Mira said, her voice sharp with urgency. We're being boxed in. Thorn gritted his teeth. The Gorathians were rallying faster than he had anticipated. If they didn't pull back now, the entire fleet would be lost. All ships, fall back, Thorn barked. We've done enough damage. Get out of here before they cut us off. The human fleet began to retreat, engines roaring as they turned away from the burning Gorathian warship. But the enemy wasn't about to let them go easily. Gorathian fighters and smaller frigates pursued, peppering the retreating ships with fire. The Resolute shook violently as another plasma bolt slammed into its side, knocking out several systems. Damage to the aft section, Mira reported, her face pale. We've lost secondary shields. Thorn's mind raced as he watched the tactical display. The retreat was turning into a desperate race for survival. If they didn't escape the Gorathians' net, they would all be destroyed. Keep us moving, Thorn said through gritted teeth. We're not done yet. As the fleet pushed through the Gorathian lines, the Resolute barely managed to dodge a final volley of fire from one of the enemy frigates. The ship's hull groaned under the strain, but they had made it. The remaining human ships surged into FTL, escaping the jaws of the Gorathian trap. In the aftermath, Thorn stood on the bridge, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The human fleet had survived, but just barely. They had struck a blow, but the cost had been steep. Mira looked at him, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. We made it. But the Gorathians won't forget this. They'll come back stronger. I know, Thorn said quietly. But now they know what we're capable of. We're not just prey for them to hunt. We're fighters. Valis, who had remained silent throughout the battle, finally spoke, his voice soft but resolute. Perhaps now the Gorathians will reconsider their course. They've seen that humanity isn't weak. That will fight for our survival. Thorn nodded. Maybe. But either way, we've bought ourselves time. Time to prepare, time to strengthen our defenses. The Gorethians wanted a war, and now they have one. He turned to the viewport, staring out at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. Humanity had been underestimated, seen as weak by the galaxy. But now the sleeping giant had awoken, and the galaxy would never be the same. "We've only just begun," Thorn said softly. "This is humanity's fight now." And as the Resolute continued its journey through the vast expanse of space, Thorn knew that this was only the beginning of the battle for humanity's survival.